John 9, and starting at verse 24. So they again called the man who was blind, and said to him, "Give God the glory. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered and said, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see." Then they said to him again, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to be his disciples?" Then they reviled him and said, "You are his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we do not know where he is from." The man answered and said to them, "Why, this is a marvelous thing, that you do not know where he is from. Yet he has opened my eyes. Now we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshipper of God and does his will, he hears him. Since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one which was born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered and said to him, "You were completely born in sins, and you were teaching us?" And they cast him out. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and when he had found him, he said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" He answered and said, "Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?" And Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him, and it is he who is talking with you." Then he said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshipped him. And Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into the world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may be made blind." Then some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words, and they said to him, "Are we blind also?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you say, 'We see,' therefore your sin remains."
We've been looking last week and this week about the way that Christ has ministered to this poor blind beggar. I love the way that right throughout the Gospel of John you have these instances where Jesus comes away from a crowd to meet an individual. He is as comfortable in a one-to-one as he is in speaking to thousands. And he doesn't think it's a waste of time to spend time with one. He doesn't think, "Well, yeah, but there's thousands who need to hear me." He makes time to speak to the one as well. And so this poor blind beggar, his day started, as we've said so often, his day started like any other day. But it was going to be a totally different day, because on this day, Jesus met him. And Jesus completely changed his life. Not just on the outside, but on the inside too. It's not only physical sight that this poor blind beggar has received. He has received spiritual sight. He has received spiritual revelation. He sees that through this miracle, that the one who has done it is from God. And we've seen there's a gradual realization. The more he talks about it, the more he gives testimony to what has happened, the more he realizes that God is in it. And he starts off by referring to Jesus as a man. He then refers to him as a prophet, somebody sent from God. And as good as that is, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. We need to see exactly who Jesus is. And a lot of people think that Jesus was a good man. A lot of people think Jesus was a prophet. It's not enough. We need to see exactly who Jesus is. And that's what the tail end of this story is all about. It's about Jesus making sure that this poor blind beggar isn't left with a half-truth. He is given the full truth. We looked this morning at the fact that he was thrown out of the synagogue. He was excommunicated for the crime of being healed. How sad is that? Because he was healed on a Sabbath, they didn't accept his healing. They didn't accept who had healed him. And so because he would not renounce his healing, and he would not renounce Christ, they threw him out. They cast him out. And as we said this morning, the sad thing was, even his own parents didn't have the strength to stand with him. He stood alone. But thank God he stood. Because he wasn't really alone, was he? Because when we testify of God, God has promised that he is with us. He gives us the words to say, and we see that in some of the responses this man gives. We see that God is doing a real work in his life. So it ended this morning with him being cast out of the synagogue. There in verse 34, he was cast out. And then verse 35 opens with a lovely verse. Jesus heard that they had cast him out. It came to his attention. Jesus heard they had cast him out. And what is Jesus going to do about that? And when he had found him. Do you see the difference in the spirits and the difference in the heart? Religion threw him out. But Christ sought him out. Religion wanted to push him away. Christ wanted to pull him close. And he deliberately goes and seeks him out. When you hear that phrase, Jesus went and found him, is there a skip in your heart when you realise that that's your destiny too? That there was a day when Jesus came to seek you? There was a day when Jesus opened up your heart as to who he was? You see, it's not a question of us finding him. The Good Shepherd finds us. As I've often said, a wandering sheep never finds his way back to the fold. The shepherd goes out to find the sheep. And that's what we see here. Jesus goes out to find him. Jesus deliberately sought him out. And when he finds him, he asks him the one question that matters. And I go as far as to say, as far as our eternal destiny goes, it's the only question that matters. Jesus finds him and he asks him one simple question. Do you believe in the Son of God? You think this man has had enough of questions over this day, hasn't he? He's been in the dock in the synagogue, he's had to make a stand, he's had people accuse him all the time, but this question comes with a different spirit. It's not seeking to undermine him at all. It's seeking to draw something out from him. Do you believe in the Son of God? And really, ultimately, that's what Christian faith all comes down to, doesn't it? We have to be able to answer that question for ourselves. It doesn't matter what our partner, it doesn't matter what our parents, our grandparents, our children, it doesn't matter what they say in answer to that question. We need to know for ourselves. Do you believe in the Son of God? Jesus has been opposed at this time because the religious leaders don't believe he is the Son of God. And they're standing against all who will not agree with that point of view. So you see, it's so important that we see exactly who Jesus is. Because if we stop short of anything beneath that standard, we're doing him a disservice. And we are blocking our path to heaven. Because if Jesus is just a good man, or if Jesus is just a prophet, he cannot die for my sin. His death on the cross was a tragedy and nothing more than that. In order for my sin to be dealt with, he has to be the Son of God. He has to be the sinless one. And that is why it is so important that we understand who Jesus is. Because if we don't know who he is, how are we ever going to ask him for forgiveness? How are we ever going to come to Calvary and bend our knee there and say, Lord, I accept your sacrifice on the cross, if he's just a man? Even if he be a good man. So Jesus puts his finger right on the heart, the very center of the question. He asks this man, do you believe in the Son of God? And he gives a very truthful answer. The man turns to him and he says, who is he, Lord, that that I may believe. You see, at this time, he doesn't know who is speaking to him. I would go as far as to say that very often, if not in most cases, if not in every case, when God first starts to speak to us, we very often don't realize who's speaking. When God first starts to work in your life, we very often don't understand that it's him that's working. This man knew something was going on in his heart. But the fact that Jesus had to ask him this question shows that Jesus wanted to draw him further. And we understand now why he needed to ask the question. How could he believe that Jesus was the Son of God if he didn't know who he was? Do you believe in the Son of God? Well, who is he, Lord? That I may believe. You see, he wants to believe, but who is he going to believe in? How can we ever come to faith if nobody has ever told us about him? How can we ever commit a life to Christ if we don't know who Christ is? How can people ever hear unless somebody goes to tell them? Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him? Can you imagine the man's reaction when Jesus says to him, you have both seen him, and it is he who is talking with you? Can you imagine that? Do you believe in the Son of God? Well, who is he, Lord? Well, he's talking to you. Very often Jesus disguised who he was. But when he came across a genuine heart who really wanted to know, he would reveal exactly who he was. How do you think this man felt when he's just been thrown out of the temple for the sin of being healed, and the very man who healed him has now sought him out and has revealed to him that he is none other than the Son of God himself? How do you think he felt when he realized that the Son of God had taken time to seek him out and to heal him? And then after healing him, hearing that he'd been thrown out of the synagogue, the Son of God has taken time to find him, to reveal to him exactly who he is. And as astonished as this man is, I am as equally astonished every time I think about my own salvation. I am absolutely astonished that the God of heaven should want to come down to earth and die on a cross for my sin, to seek me out, and then to find a time in my life where he breaks into my life and shines his light upon my heart and says to me, I am the Son of God. What are you going to do about it? Why should God do that for me? Why should he care for me? The Bible says, for God so loved the world. You see, you find it's not just you. It's all of you. It's not just me. It's all of us. He loves us that much that he is willing to die on a cross for your sin, and he will seek you out. And he will reveal to you on a one-to-one basis exactly who he is. Because he wants you to know. Because if you don't know, the consequences are not worth thinking about. We need him. And we can't find him. But he finds us. And he shows us who he is. A man, more than a man. A prophet, more than a prophet. The very Son of God. Nothing less. And it can't be anything more. The very Son of God. And this man has a choice to make. Because the revelation of who Jesus is doesn't save us. As wonderful as that is, having Jesus to shine his light into our hearts and to reveal to us who he is, that in itself doesn't save us. We have to respond to it. And he said, Lord, I believe. Based on that. Based on the very fact that Jesus had taken the time to seek him out. Jesus had taken the time to tell him who he was. And on the strength of that, there was such authority in that one sentence. The one who stands before you I am he. He looks at him and he says, Lord, I believe. And that is all that God needs from any of us, is that confession that he is who he claims to be. An acceptance that Jesus is the very Son of God, and that he died on a cross for our sins, and we can be forgiven because of what he has done. And look at this. He has been thrown out of the synagogue. That is a punishment. They're using a bit of leverage there. If you say that this man is of God, we're going to throw you out. You're not going to be allowed to partake in our worship anymore. You're going to be thrown outside of Judaism. What does Jesus do? He comes and he finds him and he tells him who he is. And in verse 38 it says that he worshipped him. One of the few instances in any of the gospel accounts where Jesus accepts worship. Because he's revealed exactly who he is. And there is that incredible moment where not only does this man acknowledge that Jesus is the very Son of God, but how can he but worship him in the light of that? How can he but worship him? The Christian faith is not religion, it's relationship. And this man is in relationship with a living God. He's been thrown out of the synagogue, he's not allowed to join any of their services, and yet he has looked into the eyes of the Son of God. And he has worshipped him. Incredible. All in the first day of sight. That morning he'd never seen anything. By the end of that day he'd seen the Son of God. It's incredible, isn't it? Absolutely incredible. Jesus said, for judgment I have come into this world. It's not saying that Jesus comes to judge the world. He doesn't need to judge the world, we judge ourselves. His very appearing is what judges us. Because it's whether we accept him or not that determines the judgment of God. He has come to save the world. But if the world rejects him, then it leads to judgment. Those who do not see may see, and those who see may be made blind. Think about the context of what he's doing there. He's talking publicly now. He has announced himself as being the very light of the world. He has proved who he is by healing this blind man, giving him natural physical sight. And yet Jesus is saying there is something deeper than that. There is a spiritual sight, there is a spiritual vision. And we need to know who Jesus is in order for us to really be able to see. And Jesus said, just as I have come and I have given this man sight, if you believe in me, you will have spiritual sight, spiritual vision. But if you reject me, you will be blind to all that God is doing. It's not a case of we can worship God and not accept Christ. As I've said continuously through these last few weeks, the whole point of these chapters is to show you cannot divide them. You cannot have the one without the other. You cannot have God without Christ. He is the very Son of God. His life and death is all about the very plan of God. I was thinking about this thought that light can blind you. And we had a physical example of it driving to church this evening. There's a very low sun. So if you're opposite the light, if you're in opposition to the light blinds you. It's funny, isn't it? It's light, it's there to give you light. It's there to give you sight. But if you're opposing it, that very light blinds you. And because the religious leaders were in opposition to Christ, you see, they were trying to fight the light. and it was making them blind. And yet that same light, if it's by the side of you, it lights up your whole path. If you're not in opposition to it, it illuminates your whole being. It illuminates you, and it illuminates everything around you. And when Jesus says, I am the light of the world, that is what his light does. It shows us who we really are. It allows us to see who he is, and it allows us to see the path ahead. His will for our lives. The poor blind man had never been able to see the path in front of him ever before. But from this day on, he could not only physically see the path in front of him, from this day on, he knew he had a path mapped out of God. The same light that will blind you if it's dead opposite you, when it's by your side or illuminating the path in front of you, the same light aids you and helps you. Christ has come to help us. Christ has come to provide light in our lives and for our lives. And if we accept who he is, we can benefit from the light of the world. But if we stand in opposition to him, that very light blinds us. And in not seeing who he is, we lose sight of God himself. Amen.